Welcome back, everyone. It is time again for another tier list, because we're only about a month away from a release date I've been anticipating for a while. That would be the North American launch of Yakuza 7, which I believe is going to be called Yakuza Like a Dragon here, because it's sort of a reboot, like a soft reboot. Either way, we are doing a tier list of the Yakuza franchise. And Yakuza is a series that I've gotten into pretty recently. I think one of my much older, much shorter videos was after I just played Zero, and I was really loving it. That game really just ticked off a lot of boxes for me. I suppose the whole franchise does, in a lot of ways. Wild tonality, lots of weird, fun mini-games. It conveys this feeling of being in a real, lived-in, realistic environment. Lots of little things that add up to make a really interesting experience. So before I get into it, a couple stipulations. Obviously, we're just doing games I've played, but I have worked very hard to play as many of them as possible. At this point, the only ones I haven't touched are spin-offs that, for the most part, you can't even get in the United States, so I'm not interested in doing that. I'm not going to import games that I can't read. But I'm also not going to include Yakuza Dead Souls because I have not played it, and I have no interest in playing it. I am also not including the Fist of the North Star game because arguably, even though that is made by the Yakuza team, and in a lot of ways it's basically just a Yakuza game, it is still too far out of the realm of these games to include. But I will be including Judgment, so that's the only spin-off that I feel makes the cut, for this list at least. So we are starting with the first game that I played, the first chronologically, and in my opinion also the greatest, and that would be Yakuza 0. This game has insane value. It just has so much to offer. It just feels like a massive game. They really do a lot with what they have. Basically all of the Yakuza games leading up to this point, it feels like they took everything from those games and they boiled it down into this thick, savory sauce, and it's just absolutely amazing to play. Great story. Despite being a prequel, it doesn't really feel like you're horribly confused because of all these references to things that will matter in future games. It is still very much a standalone story. It does really do a good job of introducing some of these key players. I mean, Majima, this is like a huge element of his character. It is kind of funny though, I will say this, if you play this game and you love Majima, don't get your hopes up because in a lot of the future games he has a very, very minor role, and in some games he's basically just not even in them. But I think it says a lot about how good of a job they do taking this character that has been around for a while and showing you this other side to him. I guess you could say it's his origin story. And also just making him just as robust and interesting to play as Kiryu, which compared to some of the other playable characters in this franchise, that's really the most impressive part. He feels just as developed and fleshed out. There's just a lot of great action here. All of the heat moves, all of the styles, really just make it a very fun beat-em-up experience. Not the greatest character action game ever made, but there's so much going on here that you can't help but smile. Lots of ridiculous mini-games. I've said it before, I put so much time into some of these mini-games that it does almost feel like they could have been their own games in a weird way if you had developed them further. You could have had it be its own game. It's ridiculous how much time I spent in the Hostess Club and some of the other locations. It just really made it an extremely fun experience. It's a very memorable experience for me, and yeah, I think a lot of that is because it's the first one that I played, but after going back and playing all the other ones, this is just such a high watermark. It is absolutely, in my opinion, one of the best games of the last decade, and absolutely worth playing if you ever get the chance. This game, truthfully, really helped me change my perspective on Sega as an entire publisher. And that's saying a lot, but we don't have time to go into that rabbit hole. Yeah, this is S tier for me. Absolutely fantastic. Love it. Kind of hard to talk critically about it because really I just kind of gush over it. But we're moving on to the follow-up game, which would be Yakuza Kiwami. This is the remake of the original Yakuza game. I'm putting it here in the A tier because it is still a very strong game. The original story and the way it's sort of been retold works quite well. But I think there are some aspects of it that when you compare it to Zero, it's just not as strong in. Really it's mostly just because Yakuza 0 kind of felt like it was 2 games worth of content, and so you cut out Majima, you cut out his hub world, and you just have Kiryu. So it might not have as much going on, but it's still enjoyable as a straightforward game. Still has a lot of fun minigames. Majima Everywhere is just this ridiculous system that they included that I can see some people finding kind of annoying, but it is pretty cool. This is a very high quality remake. I'm always interested in remakes of older games, and I would say that they've done a very good job here as well. It certainly gets bonus points for that. But I am putting this here in the A tier. So the next game would be Yakuza Kiwami 2, or 2 Kiwami, however you want to say it. But yes, this is also a remake of Yakuza 2. There's a big difference between this and the remake of the first game though, because by this time, the Yakuza team had decided to use a new engine, and this engine is a little rough around the edges, in my opinion. While it does have some advantages compared to what they were using, you do have a lesser performance. Things can be a little jankier. It might not be for everybody, but I still think that this game is very strong. Ultimately, what makes it a little weak compared to 0 and Kiwami 1 is that you only have one fighting style for the most part because the style switching is not something that was preserved. So you might not like the idea of only using the dragon style for the whole game. But I do think that the controls here are pretty good. There are some issues I have with the way that heat works now because there were some pretty big changes. This is mostly based off of Yakuza 6, but we'll talk about that later. So some people might find the combat to be not quite as exciting, but I still thought it was pretty solid in this game. And I do think this game does have a very strong story, and that is definitely a big part of why I liked it. There are also some very good minigames. Hostess Club minigame returned, and it was pretty fun, I guess. There are some other stuff that I think is cool, like Clan Creator, although I couldn't get as into it as I wanted to. Just kind of got tired of it. But yeah, really strong story this time. I don't know if it's my favorite of the stories, but it does have some pretty cool twists and turns. The ending was ridiculous, but I just thought it was very strong in that regard. I do think that, yeah, this game just has a lot to offer, so I will put it in A tier as well, because it does feel like a very big release here, very complete release for the most part. And now we're going to go back in time, because we're going all the way to Yakuza 3. And unfortunately, Yakuza 3 is all the way down in the lowest tier, which is D tier. I mean, this was released a long time ago in comparison to the games we've just spoken about. That's a big part of why it's down here for me. It's just not that good. I think it's the closest to being a bad game of these games that I have played. This is mostly because A, I don't think the story is very strong. I think the story is also very short. Like, I was actually really shocked when I got to the end of this game. There isn't a whole lot going on here. It kind of felt very forced. By this point in the story, Kiryu is out of the game. Their attempts to get him back in the game were very, very contrived, and so much of this game just feels like filler. You just run around on Okinawa doing chores and stuff, and it's just not cool. You know, a lot of people talk about this with like the Red Dead Redemption games, or I guess a lot of GTA stuff in general. And this sort of replicated that feeling of, wow, I'm just doing boring, mundane things. And yeah, it was just kind of frustrating. I thought there was a lot of potential in having a setting like Okinawa, but ultimately, yeah, this game just also has a lot of problems, or things that haven't held up very well. Random encounters are not fun in this at all, as are many other aspects. So I just did not particularly care for this game. It's up to you if you want to play it, if you can get it on the cheap, but yeah, it was pretty underwhelming in my opinion. So we're moving on now to Yakuza 4. I think it's pretty clear that with this game, the Yakuza team knew they had to shake things up. And that's why this game has 4 playable protagonists. This is cool, but it's also the game's biggest problem. Because at times it just feels like there are things you just can't do until later in the game because you're not playing as the right person. And while I do think that several of these characters are fun to play as, none of them have movesets that are anywhere close to as interesting as Kiryu's, or as complex, really. they're just a little too simplistic. Not to mention that some of the exclusive minigames that these characters have are just really weird, or to me, they just were not interesting. Some of them were actually quite poorly designed, in my opinion. I still think that this game is definitely better than 3, although it does have many of the same issues. It just does feel like a breath of fresh air. You're seeing more of Kamurocho. The world is being built out. I don't really dislike any of these new characters. I think some of them are quite strong. But I also think that the overall story was very convoluted, overly complex, definitely had some unbelievable aspects in a way that I'm not sure worked for me. So again, I'm just not totally sure about this one, but it's going in C tier. We are not doing a D tier for this, because I do think that it is a big improvement. Kiryu, I mean, he's still in the game, but he doesn't show up until pretty late, and it still felt a little contrived to have him show up, but at least we've spent a lot of time with other people, so, that definitely helped matters. Anyway, we're moving on to Yakuza 5. I'm also going to put this in C tier. It was actually kind of tough to decide where to put this game, because I do think this game is better than 4 in some ways, but it also has a lot of problems that stem from them just going even further down this road. Hey, 4 characters wasn't enough. Now we got 5 characters. But really, that wouldn't be so bad if it weren't for the fact that every single character has their own city. So a lot of this game, it is very spread out, it's all over the place. But it really depends on the campaign that you're playing. You actually start as Kiryu, and this one I actually really liked having Kiryu in it. I definitely enjoyed it, and I liked the situation that they put him in. It was a lot more interesting than 3 and 4. But once you kind of move on from that stuff, things take like an immediate nosedive when you play as Saejima. You're just in this prison for so long. It's like they couldn't even think of anything to have him do, because this is exactly what happens in the 4th game. So we've broken out of 2 different prisons as this guy. It takes forever to even get to his city. It's just kind of ridiculous. Lots of very in-depth minigames for each character, but I almost question whether or not it was even worth it, because I do like the taxi stuff with Kiryu. Saejima's hunting minigame, it's just like you have to do all this stuff for it before you can even get to his city in the final chapter of his little story. It's just ridiculous. It just has very bad pacing at points. A lot of people hate the parts where you play as Haruka and do the idol dancing, but I don't know, that was just so weird and different that I actually really enjoyed it. It was just a huge change of pace. It was ridiculous, but I actually thought it was pretty fun, I'm not gonna lie. You could argue that it's dumb, and I wouldn't say you're wrong, but it was different, and at this point I really needed a breath of fresh air, because that's a big problem with a lot of the Yakuza games. Because they were making them so quickly, they had to do all these things to try to make it different, make it stand out, and sometimes it just felt very stale. The best parts of the games tend to be the weird things, the mini-games, that sort of stuff, because there just wasn't that much they could do to shake up the real bones of the game. And I think this is just a great example, because it doesn't matter how many cities you have. If the game feels this disjointed, it's just frustrating to play. Not to mention, the story for this one also very convoluted. I found it difficult to follow. By the time we got to the end, I was asking a lot of questions, but there are things about this game I enjoy, for sure. But I just wish it had been better executed, so I have to put it in C tier. So now we are at Yakuza 6. And Yakuza 6, of course, this was the first game in the new engine. And because of that, it definitely has limitations. Kiryu's moveset has undergone some pretty big changes. The heat system, as I mentioned. In the most disappointing aspect, there are parts of Kamurocho that you can't even go to, and that's ridiculous. I don't understand how they couldn't complete those areas. But either way, I am going to put this in B tier, because after playing games like 3, 4, and 5, and then finally playing 6, this game had a level of focus to it that to me felt like a breath of fresh air, where we just have Kiryu and his story is personal. You do empathize a lot with him. To be fair, we've spent so much time with Kiryu, and that is where it does help to play games like 3, 4, and 5. We've spent so much time with him that it really does help when you have a more serious story like this that concerns him direct. So I was just very glad they decided to go down this path. In a lot of ways, this game actually kind of feels like a second attempt at making a game like Yakuza 3. I did like a lot of things about this game. It had everything that you want from Yakuza, but that personal connection between Kiryu and Haruka was there, even if Haruka unfortunately was not in the game very much. But that I enjoyed, and I did like the story. There are some ridiculous things that happen in it, for sure, that maybe are unbelievable even by Yakuza standards. But I like a lot of the side characters. I like that little crappy town that you go to, even though the hub is not very well designed. There is a lot that I like about this game, but it does not offer nearly as much as something like Yakuza Kiwami 2, so I have to put it here in the B tier, where I did enjoy it more than many of the games, but it's not as strong as the better ones, so it is kind of in the dead center of this list. And that's going to bring us to the final game, which I guess is really a bonus game, but I am including it, and that is Judgment, also known as Judge Eyes, the Grim Reaper's Last Request in Japan. I think that's the title. It's set in Kamurocho. It doesn't really have any characters from Yakuza in it, but it is using the environment and it plays very much like a Yakuza game, so I do want to include it. I actually do really enjoy this game, but I am putting it in B tier because there is a big effort to shape up the combat and shape up many aspects of Yakuza, which I do appreciate. Like Yakuza 6 and Kiwami, there is a level of jank here that was a little awkward, and if this game had had less of that, because I think this game crashed like 3 times for me. Things like that just made it kind of rough to play. But I did enjoy a lot of these new characters. I did enjoy the story. It's more of a detective game, and that made it really fun because I love that stuff. So I'm definitely going to say check this game out if you get the chance, but it isn't that much better than Yakuza 6 in my opinion. I guess if I could do like a B+ tier, this would be there, but I'm not doing that. I'm not getting that pedantic. Either way, you might find this game to be pretty fun, and I really respect the fact that they did an English dub for it, which came out pretty good. Yeah, that's about it, all I have to say here. Go check these games out, they're on sale all the time. I can't recommend Yakuza enough. Some of the older games are a little rougher. I just think that this franchise is really fascinating, and I love checking it out. I've never had a terrible experience with it or anything like that, and even the games on this list that I think are kind of middling have still provided me with a lot of fun and happy memories that you could play a better game and not have those extremes. So I think that all of these games are interesting, and I really can't wait to see what they do with Yakuza 7. I still don't know if it's a good idea that they are turning it into a turn-based RPG, but you can't say that they didn't try something new, and as much as I love some of the games on this list, this is a franchise that needs a huge breath of fresh air. A huge one. Massive. So good luck to them. That's all I have to say about Yakuza for now. Everyone, have a great day, and we will see you next time.